video, we will be replacing the exhaust manifold and catalytic converter in this 2003 Toyota Camry. Taking a look inside the engine bay, we will be focusing our attention on the center portion of the engine. Specifically, we are locating the heat shield. The exhaust manifold is located underneath this component, and this is held on by 4 bolts, these being 12mm bolts. And next we have our oxygen sensor. This is our upstream oxygen sensor. And if we follow those wires for our oxygen sensor, we do have a harness that needs to be removed. And using an oxygen sensor socket, we can loosen up our oxygen sensor and remove that. And then we should be able to work that heat shield off. Taking a look at the exhaust manifold, I am held on by 5 bolts. Now these bolts have been in there a long time, so I'm going to apply a little Amsoil metal protector to each of these bolt locations, which should aid in the removal process. And my objective at this point is just to loosen up each location, but not fully remove them. We will need a swivel to get to this last one. To prep this next step, I have installed wheel chocks behind the rear tires. I have set the parking brake. I have raised the front tires slightly off the ground, and I have installed safety stands underneath the vehicle. And if I take a look up underneath the vehicle, following my exhaust system, I can see my connection point between the rest of the exhaust system and my exhaust manifold. If I take a look at the other side, I can see an additional bolt as well as my downstream oxygen sensor. If we remove these 2 bolts, it should disconnect the rest of the exhaust system from my exhaust manifold. Taking a look back from the top side, we can see that we have a lower bracket holding this in place. And a little bit closer look, we can see that bracket actually has 2 bolts. One bolt is mounted into essentially the side of the exhaust manifold. The other bolt is mounted into the engine. We will be removing the bolt that is mounted into the engine. And this is a 12mm bolt. And we can then remove the fasteners connecting our exhaust manifold to the engine. And at this point we should be pretty loose, and we can see if we can work that out. I do have one bracket that is hitting right up here in the corner. And this is a 14mm bolt. And we'll loosen that up a little bit on the other side to see if we can pivot that out of the way. And we're going to compare our old part with our new part, so we can figure out which components we need to remove from our old part and add to our new part. We have a shield underneath our manifold pipes. This uses a 12mm socket. We'll switch this one over first. Next, we will switch our lowermost mounting bracket. This has 2 14mm sockets. Now we have one where we need to switch our heat shield before this bracket goes on, and that heat shield has a series of 12mm bolts. And this should then be ready to install back on the vehicle. Taking a look back at the vehicle, we do want to remove our old gasket. And on my engine, I'm going to clean this up, beginning with a razor blade, making sure no debris falls back into the engine. And this has a fair amount of buildup, so I'm going to stuff some rags in the exhaust ports just to prevent material from falling back in there. And then continue with the process of very carefully removing some of that buildup. And then I'll come back with some acetone and clean this up. And our goal is to get this as clean as possible. And at this point, I think I have this about as clean as I am able to get it. So I'm going to remove those rags and slip on my new gasket. And out of curiosity, I took a look at my old unit, and I can see that there is a hole in the material. Compared that to my new unit, where it looks brand new without any damage. Now, before I install this in place, I do want to check with the schematic. If we take a look at the schematic, we can see that there is a gasket that needs to be replaced between our exhaust manifold and the rest of the exhaust system. So you will want to make sure that this is replaced before we continue with the installation. And I can then slip my new unit into place. And start those nuts by hand. So I have all of those nuts started, but this unit is loose. I'm going to install the additional bolts holding this in place before tightening anything down. And we're going to begin with that bracket that got in the way earlier. And then our bracket clear down in there that mounts this exhaust system to the engine. Then we can install and tighten those bolts connecting our new unit to our existing exhaust system. And then we can go through and tighten everything down. The exhaust manifold nuts get torqued to 27 foot-pounds. And I will be tightening these in increments. So I will first go around and just tighten them by hand. I'll then come back with a ratchet and snug them down. And lastly, I will go through and torque them to 27 foot-pounds, kind of jumping around a little bit, not going in a circle. And after torquing all of our bolts and tightening all of the rest of them, we can add our heat shield. And then our oxygen sensor can be installed. And we can connect up that wiring harness.